All right, can you hear me now? Can you hear guitar and can you hear vocals? Let's see. I do apologize. Okay, awesome. Thank you for letting me know, Silo. I appreciate. It's funny that your name is Silence. All right, so let me go back. Just in case I didn't have sound for the intro, what we're going to be doing today is just going through some different ways to get more out of progressions. All right, so maybe it's something that you already know the progression, and you feel like it's kind of like if we're playing a song where it's just 3 chords or just 2 chords, it can get pretty stale just going back and forth. So for the when it comes to playing the same chord progression over and over, what you want to do is kind of vary the way you play it. Vary the way that you do your turnarounds to go back to the top of the progression. You can add all these different things in there. So the first example I was playing was to say if we are in the key of C major, okay? If we're in the key of C major, then what we can do is let's pick a progression, which is going to be a 4-3-2 progression. If you're not familiar with the number system, what that looks like is some kind of F major, some kind of E minor, and some kind of D minor. Okay? I'm playing major 7s and minor 7s, but regular major and regular minor works just as well. So F major 7, E minor 7, D minor 7. Okay? So the very first thing is if you have a song that's like that and it's just repeating, right? That might get kind of old after you've played one verse and maybe one chorus, right? So the very first thing I recommend is varying the rhythm that you're using when you're playing those. So maybe for the verse, you're just playing that plain progression, right? And then maybe when it gets to the chorus or another high energy part of the song, maybe you start varying and playing it more like a funky rhythm. When it gets back to the verse, maybe there's a big drum fill and a crash, and then you get back to just the mellow. And that simple change can be very effective, where you're adding energy to the song by adding more of the strumming when it gets to a high energy part, and then when you want to bring things back and mellow them out, then we go back to more of a laid back progression like we started with. So that's the very first tip, right? So as different sections of the song come up, change the way that you play the rhythm of those same chord changes. Okay, all right, so the next thing that I wanted to go over, let me make sure I keep my notes going on. So varying rhythm is the first tip. The second tip is to vary your target strings. This is something that I don't really see taught very often, but you can get more out of a simple chord progression by choosing to target certain groups of strings. So maybe for a certain section of the song, let's go back to our F major 7. Maybe for a certain section of the song, you target more of the lower pitched strings in that chord. So maybe the A string, the D string, and the G string. Right? So we're targeting more of the lower register, that's what it's called, lower register of that chord shape. Right? So in that case, I'm just really aiming for those top strings. Now, if you want to vary that, what you could do is now target more of the higher register, or more of the maybe G, B, and high E strings. That is my dog barking at the door. Sorry about that. So just hearing that subtle difference, that versus wrong one. Right? That has a very different feel to it as opposed to hitting the lower strings. So that could be one thing where maybe you're playing the lower pitch notes for the verse, and then maybe when it gets to like the pre-chorus or the chorus, then you're hitting, oh, whoops. And that kind of stuff's really going to cut through a little bit more too. When you're playing the higher pitched strings, It's usually going to help the guitar kind of stand out more in the mix. So even that can be a little subtle change that can vary the way that you're playing it, and so it's not boring to just go back and forth between those chords. All right, so it's all about just adding slight variations at different sections of the song. Okay, so we got those two. We got varied rhythm, and we have varied target strings, okay? Usually sticking to like 3 strings at a time is a good rule of thumb. All right, and feel free, if you have any questions about what we're going over today, go ahead and drop them in the chat for me. I will be checking chat periodically just to see if, make sure that no one's missing anything. If we need to go back and just revisit some topics, I'm happy to do so. Okay, so that's the 2 for right now. And then the next thing we can do is we can always vary the voicings. This is something that I got from watching Carry Too Smooth. You don't have to play the same voicings of the simple progressions. So maybe you're playing, once again, our F major 7. Maybe you're playing it here initially. You can always play another version of an F major 7. So you could play the one down here. You can play the one up here. You can play the one here. And while they may sound similar, there's always like little differences between them, like whether it sounds higher pitched or lower pitched. Even playing the same notes, if you're playing them on the thinner strings, it's going to sound a little bit more trebly. If you're playing them on the lower strings, it's going to sound more bassy, just how it happens, even if the notes are identical. So maybe for the initial part, you're doing our normal progression. And then you go to some different voicings of those same chords. So I'm playing the F major 7 on fret 13. Then I'm playing the E minor 7 on fret 12. And now I'm playing the D minor 7 on fret 10. And then back to the other one. So that's another little change you can make there. So always, my rule of thumb is always know how to play every chord you know at least 2 different spots on the neck of the guitar. All right, that's a first start. Typically, you'll learn it where the root note is on the A string for that major 7 bar chord. And then what I would advise you to do is learn where those root notes, or learn the shape when the root note's on the low E string, that top string. So that way you have at least those 2 voicings to pull from. And then of course, everything always repeats after the 12th fret. So any shape you can use at one point in the guitar, you can always use 12 frets down. All right, so remember that. So if I'm doing this F major 7 on fret 1, I can always add 12 frets. So now I'm on fret 13. It'll be the same chord, just up an octave. So for some of you, that might be how you learn your first 2 different locations for that chord, and that's perfectly fine. But I would always advise to know the one where the root's on the 5th string and the one where the root's on the 6th string to get you started. All right, so we've got changing rhythms, we've got targeting different strings in those chords, and now we've got playing multiple different voicings for those chords. That way you can play it in different spots on the neck. All right, so the next thing, and we're just moving right along. Feel free to stop me or ask a question if I'm going too fast. The next thing would be to add little embellishments. So this might not work if the progression or if the tempo of the song is very quick, right? Because if we're just doing, that might be a little bit fast to try to put any kind of embellishments or any kind of different movements and riffs within the progression. But if it's a slower song, something kind of like 6/8 feel. Right, something like that has a lot of potential for things that we can do. A lot of the embellishments are based off of the pentatonic scale. I'm not going to have time today to break all that down, but if you want to see how we kind of come up with these embellishments in a more detailed live stream, go ahead and let me know in the chat or in a comment if you're watching after the stream. So there's a very common So that involves a lot of like hammer-ons and pull-offs on the B string and the high E string. right? So if we learn those embellishments, then you can always add different change, and you don't have to play the same embellishment every time on that chord. But a lot of the 5th string root bar chords have those embellishments that you can do that are really close by. It's a little bit more difficult with the 6th string root ones, but you can always fill it in. And what it comes down to knowing is if you know all your pentatonic shapes, like the, and if you know which shapes are overlapping those chords, then you always have that pentatonic to pull from. So if you already know some pentatonic scale licks, I invite you to go ahead and try and experiment and see what you can do to kind of add more embellishment to those chord shapes you already know. So when I'm using this major 7, I'm really just doing hammer-ons between the 8th and 10th fret of the B string and the high E string. And you could always just make different combinations. You do that, you could do that, whatever it is. So anything between 8 and 10 on the B and the high E string will work for that major 7. And for that matter, whenever you use this major 7 shape, even if I did a C major 7 on fret 3, you could always go between the 3 and the 5. So that movement's always relative to whatever fret you're on. It'll just start at the fret that your bar finger's on, and you can use the same thing 2 frets down on that B and high E string. And there's more. Time's not permitting me to go through all of those, but that's the thing. So once you change, or that's the concept I wanted to get across, you can change the way you embellish those chords to make it a little bit different from section to section in that song. Okay, and the final tip is to kind of add little like riffs and fills in between. So it's the same concept of like embellishment, but it's just now you're trying to fit things in before the turnaround or during the turnaround of your progression. If you're not familiar with what a turnaround is, it's basically like how you go about going from the end of one sequence of the progression. So our sequence is, once again, F major 7, E minor 7, and D minor 7. So once we get to the end, once we get to that D minor 7, we have to turn around and go back to the F major 7. Then it repeats. So that little break, whatever that time is in between when your progression ends, or one instance of that progression ends, and you start over back at the top of the progression, that's called your turnaround. So you could fill that turnaround in with more chords, right? Maybe that's how you do it. Maybe you go D minor 7, E minor 7 to get back to the beginning of the progression. Or what you can do, you can fill that in with little licks. Right, little pentatonic licks. I'm using the A minor pentatonic for that. So that's 5, 8, 5, 7 for the next 3 strings. 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 7. And then we go 5, 8 for the last 2. And when I say 5, 7, 5, 8, I'm talking about the fret numbers. So 5, 8, 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 8, 5, 8. And so for that progression, very, very simple, and there's so many things you can do with that. Any pentatonic lick that you know, you can always try to fit it in between the turnaround and to start over the top of the progression. Okay, so you can do that. You can do little riffy things. So it's like little things, and these little embellished little triadic things, they're all coming from different chord voicings. So this little part here is kind of based off of an A minor 7. And then that chord is based off of a D minor 7, which, if you remember, is a part of our progression already. So So that's another thing you can do. It's kind of, if you have some space, if the tempo will allow it, and you have some space between when one instance of the progression ends and then the next one starts over, during that little turnaround phase, try to fit something in there, whether it's a pentatonic lick or a little riff or some kind of triad movement, whatever you know. And I suggest you start with slower tempos, of course. Okay, so let's check chat real quick. All right, so we're good. Let's see. Is that Froylan? Froylan says, are you using plugins? So I'm not using any plugins. All my tones and sounds are coming from a Line 6 Helix unit. So it's like a multi-effects pedal. It simulates an amp, cabinet, as well as a pedal board. So it has, in my signal chain, all I have are reverb, a little bit of compression sometimes. I don't use a lot of compression when I play R&B style. And I'm using a simulation of a Fender, I think a 64 Deluxe reverb. So it's like a Fender sounding amp. And that's about it. Spring reverb, 64, no, it's a Princeton. Yeah, 64 Princeton. So a Princeton reverb, spring reverb unit, and that's about it. That's all I'm using right now. Cool. Silas says, definitely we'll be watching this again. Awesome. I'm glad that you're getting some value out of it. Don't forget to hit the like button if you like what we did today. And I would like to open the floor for questions. I got about 5 minutes until I got to run. But if you have any questions about what we talked about today, if you want me to reiterate anything, I'm happy to do that. If you have any questions in general about R&B, about music, the floor is yours. I'm happy to help if I can. But yes, so the key takeaway I want you to walk away from this stream is to understand that you can always do more with what you already know on guitar. I know it can be very frustrating to feel like I don't know what to practice next. I'm just playing the same riffs, the same licks, the same progressions I've been playing for years. That usually happens around when you get to like the intermediate phase, where you know all your open chords, you feel okay with bar chords, you know some of your pentatonic shapes and all that, but then it's like, what do I do from here? I always advise you to go back and make sure, one, that everything is good. If you're good with your progressions, make sure you're hitting those progressions on time. You saw I was making mistakes just now, so I can work on that same progression. I've played a 4-3-2 progression plenty of times, but there's always room to improve and make sure you're really tight with it. That's what differentiates the more casual or hobbyist guitarists from people who can get to that elite level and play out stadiums, is that they're working on the basic stuff and they're playing the same progressions, but they're making sure they're perfect, or making sure they can do more with what they already know. So we talked about varying the rhythms. We talked about doing different chord shapes. If any of that stuff is something that you're not really strong in yet, that's what you have to practice. Learn some more different shapes for the chords you already know. Learn some different licks for the pentatonic. Learn some embellishments off of those chords. And we'll go over this stuff in future live streams and future lessons. But that's just where you want to head in that direction. All right. How can I strengthen what I already know and kind of refresh it and make it new or make it challenging again? Alrighty. So if there are no questions, let me see. So the dopest says, does the pentatonic riffs you do relate to the overall key of the progression or specific chords? Yes, it relates to the overall key. So I learned the embellishments off of the chord shapes, but they're always coming from notes that are within the key, if that makes sense. So the key is your framework. It lets you know which notes you're allowed to use, which chords you're allowed to expect. So that's really what you're working within. And then I learn the notes that I can embellish from, or I learn the embellishments for each chord within the key. Hopefully I explained that well. And I kind of learn them as shapes. I don't really think about them in terms of like, oh, I'm playing the 3rd and the 5th and the 7th. I think about it like, all right, if I'm playing a 5th string root major 7 chord, then I can make this shape for my embellishments, and it's always going to work as long as I use that same shape. Great question. Frolian Bass says, are those DT770? Is it too harsh? What does it say? Sorry, there's a emoji in the way. Is it too harsh on the ears when you monitor guitar? No, it's not. So they are DT770s. The way I have it kind of set up, especially using a Fender amp, it's usually kind of trimming a lot of the high end, and I don't use very high volume when I listen back. So I definitely recommend these. They have a very good flat response. It can get a little harsh if the volume gets high, but I always kind of protect my ears and drop the volume a little bit. All right. And for DT770, he's talking about the headphones, if you're not sure what those are. I'm thinking about getting like the open back, like the 990s, I think they are. I think they're open back. They're a little bit more expensive, but I kind of want to have that for reference as well when I'm checking my mixes. Yeah, it looks like there's not really any more questions. There is about a 15-second delay from when you type something to when I see it. So I'll leave a little bit of time for people who want to get their questions in. Now I'll do my blurb. If any of the concepts that we went over today are just like way above your level, but you're interested and you want someone to kind of help you get to that level, I do offer private lessons through Zoom. All right, so if you are interested in lessons, go ahead and drop me an email at tizoguitar, just like the channel name, tizoguitar@gmail.com. Say, hey, I saw your stream. I wanted to hear about lessons, and I will get back to you with some information as soon as possible. Likewise, if these chord shapes are completely new to you and you want to know what are these shapes that we use for R&B, I've compiled something called Tizo's R&B Chord Library, Volume 1. And it's basically a collection of 35 different shapes and voicings for the most common chords I've come across in my time playing R&B music. So it's really just kind of a resource for you to say, all right, these are the chords I really need to know to play R&B. There's some extra ones in there that aren't as common, but I wanted to make sure you had multiple options for every chord that you learn. So some of them have like 3 different voicings for the same chord. Some of them have 2, but there's at least 2 for every voicing. And that stuff will really save you a lot of time because you're going to find these chords as you continue to learn R&B, you're going to see that they just keep popping up. Same major 7s, minor 7s, major 9s, all that. So I just put that together for you. The link will be in the description. If you want to go ahead and check that out, it is available. And just to reiterate my schedule. So my streaming schedule is right now, it is subject to change, but right now I'm doing Saturdays at 12 p.m. Eastern, and I'm doing Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, all right? Tuesdays are more of learning like songs or licks, and then Saturdays are more for general topics like this, like ways to improve on guitar, how to practice effectively, music theory tutorials, that kind of stuff. That's what the Saturday's for. So if we got no more questions, I will go ahead and get out of here. Thank you so much for being a part. And for those who asked questions, thank you for your questions. Feel free to comment questions if you have any more, and I'll try to get back to them and address those maybe next stream on Tuesday night. I hope to see you guys on Tuesday. Have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.